Hello everybody and welcome to chapter number 9, Aggregate Demand and Supply. And in this chapter, we're going to go ahead and extend John Maynard Keynes' model of aggregate expenditures that we laid out in the previous section and add one more important variable. And as the name sort of implies, aggregate demand and aggregate supply take a look at supply and demand analysis for essentially all the markets within an entire country. We're not focused in on just one particular market, but now we're focused in on every single market within a particular country or nation. And the foundations that we laid in chapter number 3, just with supply and demand in general, are going to become very applicable within this chapter as well. This is why I said all the way back in that particular chapter to understand the foundations and structures and exactly how to shift all the curves, because we will see it again, and this is exactly where we come to that idea. So with supply and demand, aggregate supply and demand, we're going to follow a very similar pattern that we laid out in the beginning of the semester, where we built up the demand side of the market, but on the aggregate side, see exactly why our demand curve is going to be downward sloping, and then see the determinants of aggregate demand, what shifts our aggregate demand curve to the right, to the left, etc., etc. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the supply side, and the supply is just going to be a little bit different in the fact that we actually have two different supply curves we need to take a look at. We take a look at the supply curve in the short run, and we also take a look at the supply curve in the long run. So what are the similarities and differences between these two curves? And then finally, once we combine everything together onto one graph, we'll be able to get our idea of what equilibrium is going to be under this model. So not just equilibrium, but long run equilibrium and short run equilibrium. And we can see exactly where we are in terms of the business cycle based on these illustrations. So just to go ahead and start off, we once again start off with a little bit of a history lesson. Remember that John Maynard Keynes was the one that came up with the idea of aggregate expenditures, the model we took a look at in the previous chapter, and also began the ideas of aggregate demand and aggregate supply as well. Remember that all of his theories, all of his models came during the Great Depression, and during this time, things were very bad economically. Industrial capacity was unused, employment was very high, businesses were not investing. So this is why John Maynard Keynes argued for government intervention and argued for a lot of spending in order for us to get out of the recession. In these type of situations, it is possible to expand output and employment by generating productive activity. So essentially, hitting any one of our spending components through consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So this is why he was a very, very big proponent of having a lot of spending through any of these particular categories, because it's all going to be affected by the multiplier, and that should lead to greater aggregate income and output. However, he did leave out one particular variable in the aggregate expenditures model, and that was the impact that all the spending would have on prices. You notice that in the previous chapter, we never talked about prices at all. And our job in this particular chapter is to go ahead and take the AE, the aggregate expenditures analysis, add in the impact of prices in order for us to see what happens with our macroeconomic equilibrium in a way that we are familiar with. So here, in order for us to build up the aggregate expenditures model, or the aggregate sort of supply and demand model, we need to go ahead and add in prices. So as we talked about, the aggregate expenditures model that we talked about in the previous chapter is considered to be a fixed price model. It is considered a fixed price model. A fixed price model. So here, it just leaves prices fixed. So ceteris paribus, prices are staying constant. However, we know that this is not very realistic, it's not very applicable, so our job is to take this model right here and add in the supply side. So goal is to add in the supply side, of the market, supply side, which will account for changes in prices, which accounts for changes in prices, changes in prices. So here, the idea that we want to add in this most important macroeconomic variable, the prices right here, will allow us to build up aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and see what happens in macroeconomic equilibrium to our GDP and the price level. So this is exactly where we're going to be heading. And we'll go ahead, start off by taking a look at the aggregate demand side and see exactly how we derive that and what the demand curve is going to be, how it's going to be shifted, and exactly how that contributes to our equilibrium. We'll go ahead and start that off in the next few videos.